Hey, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I want to talk about 3 proofs for God's existence. 2 of these 3 are from St. Thomas Aquinas, whose feast day we celebrate today. He died on March 7th, 1274. For my money, the greatest human mind of history. Thomas Aquinas was a Dominican priest and scholar, and he wrote 9 million words without word processing, without AI. Absolute colossal human genius and a great saint. He synthesized Greek philosophy, kind of baptized it with the gospel without compromise. He wrote so many works of philosophy and history and apologetics and evangelization and culture and literature. He just tied so many things together. And he's really the father of the classical realist philosophy that Christians can call their own. Popes since Thomas Aquinas have extolled his scientific method. Really, before what we now call the scientific method, Thomas Aquinas had laid down the principles of induction and deduction. And his proofs are really, really fascinating. So before we dive in, I'm going to be covering 2 of the 5 ways or proofs for God from the first part of the Summa, and also an argument from C.S. Lewis. But I want you to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell and thumbs up. The more people who can connect with this content, the more conversations we can have. So I'd love to hear your comment in the comment section as well. And at the end, I'm going to be mentioning a little bit about the True North movement, because this is the kind of thing we talk about all the time inside True North. Okay, what do we mean by proof? Well, Thomas Aquinas is not laying down the kind of laboratory-based proof based on the senses. It's proof in the sense of high probability. Something similar to when you get on an airplane and before you make a right-hand turn down the aisle to find your seat, if you look to the left, you might see the backside, the back hair of the pilot or pilots. Now, you don't know. You have not conducted scientific studies to prove that this pilot is A, sober, B, qualified pilot. But there's a very high probability. The building you're sitting in right now is probably not going to collapse in the next 5 minutes. Do you know that for sure? Well, the probability is so high that the engineering and the construction, the materials of the building are going to sustain you while you watch this video. So it's probability, not actual 100% certainty, because the human mind is a funny thing. We see what we want to see. We have confirmation bias. But what these proofs do, and Peter Creighton and Father Ron Ticelli have come up with 20 proofs for God's existence. What the 5 proofs of Thomas do is verify that the human mind can know with certainty that God exists. Moral certainty. Absolute certainty is kind of a phantom or a unicorn that gets into neurosis. We can know with moral certainty, using the light of reason alone, that an uncaused cause, an unmoved mover, a necessary being, an intelligent designer, and the perfection of all perfections is the explanation for the universe. And his arguments come down to cause and effect and what is dependent on something else. So I'm going to start with probably the one that resonates with most people. This is the 5th way of Thomas Aquinas. Now, the way Aquinas argued, the way he presented his disputations is in the old scholastic method of you begin a topic and then you start with the opposing arguments to the thing you ultimately want to establish. So Thomas Aquinas begins with, there's no God, because science alone explains things. You don't need to add this blob concept called God on top of things, because nature alone explains the world and the things in it. Secondly, there's no God because if God is good, which he is said to be, then there could not be any evil. Therefore, that's a contradiction. Therefore, there's no God. And then he argues against each of his objections. And he comes up with sed contra, or on the contrary, I say that. And then he presents 5 different proofs. The first one is the argument from mover, the prime mover. Movement doesn't just mean like that. It means causation, something from potential to actual. The second cause is, or the second way rather, is the efficient cause, that things have effects in this world, and you can't have an infinite series of effects and causes. That's like imagining a train with an infinite number of cars, but no engine. And the third way is the one I'm going to get into. That's the way of possibility and perfection, or sometimes called the argument from contingency. The fourth way is the argument from perfection. We say things like, that man is just, that man is good, that woman is kind. that picture is beautiful. Well, the reason we say good, better, or best is if there's an absolute perfection of goodness, of justice, of beauty, of truth. The fact that we say better and better and better and better, the only reason we can say that is if there's the superlative, the ultimate perfect, against which these other examples of goodness, beauty, and truth, and so on, justice, exist. So that's the fourth argument. And the fifth argument is the one I want to start with, and that's the one that resonates, I think, with the most people, and that's the argument from design. Thomas argues that there are movements on behalf of bodies in this world, whether it's squirrels or arrows shot by archers, and the things that are being moved towards certain ends do this even if the object itself that's coming to some pattern of growth is not rational. He uses the example of an archer. And it's very compressed. Let me just read the fifth proof, because I think you should hear it in Thomas's very dense and clear prose. This is a good English translation from his original Latin and Italian. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world and involves design. We see that things that lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end. By end, he means purpose. And that is evident from their acting always or nearly always in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. One example of always or nearly always would be an apple orchard. Apples tend to come to harvest in the fall, but not every apple tree in that orchard is going to do that. But it's almost the case. This is how nature tends toward certain predictable ends. Hence, it's plain that not fortuitously, but designedly, in other words, it's not random, it's on purpose, designedly do they achieve their end. Now, whatever lacks intelligence cannot move toward an end unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end. And this being we call God. That's the argument from design or governance of the world. Now, if you were to walk in the forest with someone and you came across a painting in a frame with, say, tempera or oil painting, and it was a cityscape and a little river in the city and a bridge and clouds and an airplane and people walking on the sidewalk and maybe Christmas decorations. If one person said to the other, "Oh, look at this painting, that's amazing. I wonder who painted it." And the other person replied, "Oh, no one painted that." "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, it's just here. It just exists." The reason that answer is absurd is because the painting, indeed the whole forest, bears evidence of design, of intelligent purposefulness. It's a very good refutation of Darwinian evolution, by the way, by a writer named James Perloff. It's called Tornado in a Junkyard. Assuming that randomness created the world, so complex as it is like imagining a tornado running through a junkyard and producing a Boeing 747. It boggles the mind that some people can't see the clear evidence of design, order, and purposefulness in this world, including, let's say, the human eyeball. Just research the complexity of the human eyeball. And we're not even talking about the human mind, just the eyeball. So the world bears the mark everywhere you turn of intelligence and order, design, and an intellect that explains the lesser beings in the world that are directed towards certain ends, whether it's squirrels or apple orchards or arrows shot by archers. All right, I'm gonna go to the third way, which is the argument from possibility and necessity. But before I do that, I want to talk about it. I want to insert a C.S. Lewis proof, and this is the argument from desire. Sehnsucht is the German word that he uses in his proof. I believe it's from the book Mere Christianity, but he might allude to it in his book Surprised by Joy. When C.S. Lewis was an atheist before 1929, he said something I think is funny and kind of profound. He said, "When I was an atheist, I knew God did not exist, and I was very angry with him for not existing." So in some ways, atheism is a cry of the heart, a cri de coeur, an existential reaching out for meaning. So the first argument is Thomas's fifth way, the argument from design. The argument from desire is in three parts: major premise, minor premise, conclusion. Now, this is not the kind of proof made by causation, as Thomas's have a similar pattern, that you can't have moved objects without an unmoved mover. You can't have an infinite series of caused effects without a cause that's uncaused. This one is more existential, and I want you to work with me on what he means by desire. And he's really talking in the first premise, the major premise, with natural desires. You don't have a natural desire for a Lamborghini. That's an artificial desire. You don't have a natural desire for social status. You don't have a natural desire for a ermine fur coat if you're a lady, or pick the coolest racing jacket. Those are superficial, artificial desires. A natural desire is one that comes from nature. You're born with it. You grow into it. One natural desire is hunger. Another natural desire is the desire for sex, sexual union. Another desire is for drink. You have thirst. We have a natural desire for beauty. We want things to be ordered. We have a desire for company. We have a desire to be loved and to love. The first premise is all natural desires are satisfied by things in this world. All of them, no exception. For the natural desire for, if you have hunger, which is the natural desire for food, guess what? Food exists to satisfy that natural desire. You have a desire for sex. Well, the opposite sex exists. It can happen for you. You're thirsty. Well, drink exists, whether it's fine wine or ice water or Gatorade, whatever it is. Drink exists to satisfy hunger, and it keeps you alive. You're lonely, you want company. Well, fellowship exists. So all natural desires, Lewis says, are fulfilled by things in this world. The second premise is there's another kind of desire that is not satisfied by things of this world, and that desire is deeper than the others. It's felt by the heart in a much more visceral way. And it's in the form of longing. Maybe you've had the experience of being at a party or a wedding or a gathering. You're in a pub and everybody's happy and singing and clinking glasses, and there's great fellowship, and maybe it's some celebration. Maybe in the middle of that, you have a little pang of loneliness. Suddenly you feel alone in the crowd. Maybe you're at a beach and there's a crackling fire and you're just filled with a kind of melancholic nostalgia. You don't even know what for. There's some ache for fullness, eternal satisfaction, rest, full communion with some other. It's a mysterious thing. It's something more poetic than scientific, but I think everyone has had this experience of wanting to know everything, be known by someone completely and accepted for who you are. That's the minor premise. The major premise, every natural desire is satisfied by something in this world. Minor premise, there's a deeper desire, more poignant, more touching, more, in a sense, more urgent, more transcendent than these other natural desires, that is not satisfied by things in this world. So what conclusion follows necessarily from those two premises? Major premise, all natural desires are fulfilled by something in this world. Minor premise, there's a much deeper desire that's not satisfied by anything in this world. Conclusion, there must exist a satisfaction to that deeper desire. Not in this world, in another world that we call heaven or the presence of God. I think it's a fascinating proof, but it makes you kind of look within at the second premise. that deeper desire to know and to be known, to love and to be loved, that will never be satisfied by a created thing. It's impossible. So this is a kind of an extended way of saying the famous line from St. Augustine's The Confessions, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until we rest in thee." That is C.S. Lewis's argument from desire. The third one, in a way, it's my favorite of Thomas's proofs, and it's sometimes called the argument from contingency or the argument from possibility and necessity. So I'll go through his very compressed version of it, and then I'll talk a little bit more, kind of add some water to the concentrated orange juice. The third way, he says, to prove God exists is taken from possibility and necessity. Now I'm going to go slow. It's not that, the concepts are not difficult, but it's compressed. So you kind of have to slow down your mind and follow along. Remember, Thomas wrote this Summa Theologica for beginners. So this is meant to be kind of a primer, as the English say, an introduction. The third way is taken from possibility and necessity, and runs thus. We find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, like you and I. Whatever room you are, or if you're walking now, watching this on your phone, just look around, because everything you're looking at, in fact, the phone you're holding or the computer you're looking at, it's possible that it exists, because it does exist, but it's also possible for it not to exist, because there was a day when it didn't exist, and there will come a day when it doesn't exist, because cell phones, objects, trees, all the things in nature are not eternal. They come into being and they pop out of being. So we find in nature things that are possible to be and not to be, since they are found to be generated and to corrupt, and consequently they are possible to be and not to be. Sounds a bit like Hamlet, doesn't he? But it's impossible. Shakespeare was Catholic. Maybe he was getting into some Thomas Aquinas' proof there in his play Hamlet. But it's impossible for these always to exist. For that which is possible not to be, at some time, is not. If it's possible for something not to be, then at some point it doesn't exist, because it had the possibility of non-being. It's true of all things in nature. Therefore, if everything is possible not to be, then at one time, there could have been nothing in existence. Now, if this were true, even now, there would be nothing in existence. Because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. Therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist. And even now, there would be nothing in existence, which is absurd, because here we are. Therefore, not all beings are merely possible, but there must exist something, the existence of which is necessary. But every necessary thing either has its necessity caused by another or not. Now, it's impossible to go to infinity of necessary things which have their necessity caused by another, as has been already proved in regard to efficient causes. So he's talking about proof number 2. Therefore, we cannot but postulate the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity, and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity. This all men speak of as God. So you look around the world, and you see things that have the inbuilt possibility that they don't exist. This has the possibility of not existing. At one point, it didn't exist. Same with me, same with you, same with this microphone, headset, pliers, random piece of tape. If everything in the world had the possibility of not existing, then at some point, let's assume time is infinite, at some point, all of those potentially not to be conditions would exist. In other words, if everything has as a feature of its existence the possibility that it doesn't exist, at one point there'd be nothing. Because no individual thing has to exist. And if no individual thing has to exist, then at some point in the past, nothing would exist. But nothing cannot produce something, and here we are. So there must exist something on which it's dependent for nothing else for its existence. In other words, God is the only necessary being. Only God has to be. He's the only self-existent being. And this is why he gave the name to Moses in the book of Exodus at the burning bush. I am who am. God is amness, the fullness of being. Robert Farrar Capon says we need a more assertive way to say this. Instead of saying God is, which is a little bit, he says, passive, we should say God bees. He's in the business of being. He's the source and ground of being. So that's the proof from necessity and contingency. If all beings in the world have as an inbuilt possibility that they don't have to exist, then at one point they didn't exist. And if that's true of one thing and true of all things, then at some point in the past, all things would have stopped existing. But that's absurd because the world does exist and is sustained in being, even though all of the parts are contingent on something else. The being behind the whole is the only necessary being. And this is what men call God. This is how Thomas ends. He ends his proof. And everyone understands this to be God, which everyone gives the name of God. Thus all men speak of as God. And this is what we mean by God. So he's not even talking about Jesus and scripture and inspiration and sacraments. He's just talking about the approaching God philosophically as the idea of the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover, the absolutely necessary being, the complete fullness of perfection, and the intelligent designer. So this is the kind of thing we talk about inside the True North movement. I want to ask the intercession of St. Thomas Aquinas to enlighten people's minds to the fact that reason and faith are partners in the game called life, that, as Bishop Sheen said, faith is to a telescope what reason is to the human eye. Faith provides more information, more truth because God reveals it. But the human eye is a good starting point. We just can't see Alpha Centauri with it. We need a telescope. And in the analogy, the telescope is the gift of faith, and the human eyeball is the gift of reason. The Catholic Church pays human reason a great compliment in the First Vatican Council, where it is defined as something Catholics must believe, that while God's existence is mysterious, we can know without faith that God exists. The human mind alone is capable of coming to moral certainty that God exists. So it's an article of faith that that's true. Love to hear your thoughts on what a proof is. Cardinal John Henry Newman said that the proofs are like strands of metal. One strand of metal, it might be vulnerable to cutting, but if you have a whole pack of strands of metal, that's called a cable. And the cable can hold up an entire bridge or a building. So these proofs are really fascinating. There's 20 of them in Peter Crave's book, Handbook of Christian Apologetics, later published as Handbook of Catholic Apologetics with him and Father Ron Ticelli. Good book, I recommend. Give us a follow. Check out the link, and you might really love being part of the True North movement. We have members and counting over 20 countries. We talk about faith and reason, literature, movies, books, influencers, evangelization, culture, and tradition. And if you're ever in France, I lead pilgrimages as well. The main website, patrickcoffin.media, can give you some more information on where we go. In Toulouse, France, there's a Dominican friary, convent church, and they're disattached to the wall is an altar with a little tiny plaque, you might miss it, saying, "In this altar lie the remains of Thomas Aquinas." So That's pretty humble for the greatest mind in history, when certainly one of the greatest saints of the Catholic Church. He's buried not in Italy, but in France, in Toulouse. So if you're ever in France and you're near Toulouse, check out and say a prayer for me and the people watching this. The great Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. Be a saint. What else is there?